Hello, I'm Brigantia Blackbird of Blackbird Grimoire. Welcome to the Muggles Guide to Paganism and Witchcraft. And just to reassure anyone listening, no, I do not mean Muggles in a pejorative sense. It's just a convenient term to distinguish non-pagans and non-witches from those who do practice pagan and witchcraft. And my thanks to the author J.K. Rowling for providing us with this term that is very recognizable in our modern day culture. Even though this wasn't quite what it did when she coined it, it generally gets the point across. So to start with, why would the Muggles need a guide to religions and magical practices that are outside of their own convictions? At first glance, this might seem pretty presumptuous, so I want to make my reasoning and my intentions for this series clear. The Western world has been 100 years, and it has been very much on the upswing since. And rather than this being a rejection of the roots of Western culture, it is actually an embrace of its most ancient origins. It is the soil, if you will, out of which Western culture, nations, and native religions grew. And even after the mass conversion to monotheism, so much of what was so ingrained into people's souls that many of the traditions, customs, and beliefs and practices still endured, even if they were tweaked to be somewhat acceptable to the church. Now, this may be a disturbing thought for monotheists of the Abrahamic traditions, particularly those who are Christian, so I would like to offer you some reassurances. Pagans do not seek to destroy the West. If anything, we have more reason than anyone to seek its preservation and to do what we can to ensure its continuation. Now, while it is true that we do tend to see Abrahamic religions as something that was artificially grafted onto Western people rather than being anything organic, it still, in spite of that, it is not our goal to try to force anyone to give up their faith or to change their way of life. The objective is for pagans just to be out in the open, practicing freely, and generally going about their business without any undue fighting. So, why, you might ask, should I create a series that is intended for non-pagans and non-witches if the goal isn't conversion? Well, there's a great need for people simply to have accurate information about who we are, what we believe, and what we do. I mean, we are part of the community, and in order for people who have, differing views to have good neighborly relationships, there does need to be some mutual understanding. And there's many reasons why this isn't already the status quo, and I think I'll enumerate a few of the issues. This series will become very apparent to you, and hopefully anyone from an Abrahamic or a non-pagan faith will feel a lot more comfortable hearing what I have to say. So let's get into it. Now, to lay the groundwork, let's just try putting the shoe on the other foot for a moment, just so that you can, in a way that's more personal to you, have a frame of reference for the situation that pagans have really been in since the start of the revival era. Now, as Christianity is a religion in this country, what I'm going to outline, it's really tailored for that particular perspective. So if you happen to be of a different faith, just extrapolate as necessary. So imagine, if you will, close your eyes if necessary, whatever helps put you in this frame of mind. Just imagine this alternate universe, and that we were in this world in which Christianity has been common practice for more than, let's say, 1,500 years. You have some remains of a couple churches, some cathedrals, but there's not a whole lot of information about the history of the religion as a whole, let alone the split up of all the various denominations or, particular doctrines, or, even the precise usage of, how did, Christians carry out their day-to-day affair? What were their important holy days? How did they, what was the order of church services? There just is not available to you. And the only thing that you have of the Bible to go off, the book of Psalms, an account of the Sermon on the Mount, the book of Acts, and the book of Revelation. Now, the shoes are in for this. Now, just imagine that in spite of that lack of information, despite that disconnect of any century, you still felt in your bones that there was something, and you fell into this particular God, and you decided that you wanted to rebuild the Christian religion, or at least try to. Now, when you're starting off with essentially no infrastructure and very little solid information, how closely do you think you would be able to that of present day Christians or those of the first century? It would be pretty challenging. And of course, if you were in such a scenario, it would be absolutely impossible for us to be up where essentially everyone else left off and have a carbon copy of Christianity that would be in a recognizable form, you would recognize today. There just wouldn't be enough information available for you to do so, especially since no one in living memory in that scenario would have been part of that Christian world at its inception or at its height. What would be within your power is to study what source material you did have available, look for principles that you could apply, and then build up your practices based upon those principles. Now, if you can envision all that, then you have a pretty good idea of what the process for pagans in the modern era has been and what we are still going through today. Now, on top of particular challenge, now imagine also in this alternate reality that you are trying to reconstitute Christianity in which that religion has been demonized for centuries. It has been distorted by people who needed to twist things for either their to maintain their religious power or to gain political power. And this whole belief system and those who practice it have been outright slandered because it was a necessary process for the opposition to go through in order to take or maintain power. So in this, just envision how defending your personal project to reconstitute Christianity would be. Just imagine the hostility from people who had believed the lies and didn't know anything differently. And then they just concluded that you had given yourself up to evil of the most blatant kind, and that you were repeatedly and consistently told that you would experience divine eternal judgment, what you were doing, and that you faced ostracism for the entirety of your life if you carried on with this, possibly from close friends or even family members. And then did it all up, you would still be regarded by suspicion by your community. You would be labeled someone weak in the faith, even if you did say, well, okay, maybe I was wrong, I'll walk away. And then worse, let's say you stick with it. And then you are surrounded by people who refuse to hear you out when you try to believe in the reasons for them and when you try to provide why it's not actually what the enemies of that faith said. It's not a pretty picture, is it? But that scenario is precisely what pagans and witches have experienced, to varying degrees, admittedly, since the revival began. Now, today, we are not experiencing the worst of what hostility has to offer, but that hostility does still exist, and it seems to bother some people more than others. And of course, the discourse that we see on social media is often far worse than anything we experience in a more face-to-face kind of discussion. People don't seem to care what they say to each other as long as they're just clacking away at a keyboard. And then, if you challenge them on their bad manners, the usual excuse consists of, well, I'm just saying what I think and they're too weak to handle it. But is that what's really happening? Are people actually just being fearless and forthright about their beliefs? Or are they actually nasty, mean-spirited assholes trying to twist around the concept of candor in order to serve as shield for their bad manners and their character? At any rate, that mentality has had a profoundly detrimental effect upon public discourse, regardless of what the topic is. You can about highly contentious politics, religion, philosophy, or you could do something really innocuous, sharing of common hobbies. Look at what I knitted. That's my new dog. People will still complain about people who seem to devote their entire existence to finding that thing to complain about, and then they try to paint other people in the worst possible light, whether it's deserved or not, and of course, refusing to admit that there's any possibility that they got the wrong end of the stick. Call me crazy, but I don't think that's a recipe conducive to having a functional society. Certainly not in the Western world in general, and definitely not in the United States, that is founded individual rights and responsibilities, and that the intention was creating a government and putting it in the position of a servant rather than a ruler. Now, granted, I'm talking about what was intended to do, not the mess we're dealing with. That's a topic for an entirely different video series. But then you also think we are a people composed of shared ancestry and millennia of history history, once you look at all that put together, it becomes absolutely essential to have a workable framework for people to exercise their autonomy and to be able to conduct their ideological disagreements in a spirit of mutual debate and discussion. Otherwise, it just falls apart. And when I say fall apart, what I mean smashes into smithereens. Now, in all likelihood, any person who's watching this probably has some familiarity with history, and they are probably fairly aware of what happens when civilizations collapse, and they know it's not a fun time for anyone. It is so much too terrible for you. In order for people to function amicably in the same society, it requires good etiquette, mutual respect, and observing and enforcing boundaries. If that is done, things go well. If it is not done, then hostility and conflict is the unavoidable result. The challenge lies in all of us learning to better navigate conflicting beliefs and accept how others to conduct their they see fit, provided they are breaking our legs. Or, in other words, as long as we are not compelled to pay for their lifestyle or their beliefs, and as long as we are not suffering harm to our person or property if we choose not to live as they do. Another necessary step to improving relations lies in embracing that which we do have in common, and it has to be genuine commonalities. If we try to fake it, or we just have one side imposing the other until they comply, that's going to cut it, and we end up right back where we started. That's what I hope this series will ultimately do. First to inform non-pagans so they can have more productive and less hostile exchanges, with me and mine. And second, to explain what our differences actually are and why we are different. And then third, to highlight the things we genuinely have in common and use that as a basis to come together as a people, even if we aren't rallying around the same God or gods. Now, just to be clear, it is neither the goal nor my expectation that any Christian or Jew or Muslim or Buddhist or Hindu or atheist or fill in the blank will watch this series and then be converted to paganism, let alone my own personal dogma. Instead, my hope is that this can be just part of the effort that many people are putting forward to try and lower the temperature on ideological disagreement and to encourage the process of us rehumanizing our fellow men. Now, it was the philosopher Aristotle who said that it is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. So I do not to agree with the premises of pagan religion, only to properly understand what those premises are. Nor is it my intention to try and forbid anyone from criticizing us. By all means, that's part of open public discourse. But in order to properly criticize, one must first have knowledge. So I invite you to come along on this journey to improve the state of your knowledge, whether you agree, disagree, or you're disinterested. Hear it from the horse's mouth, what is what and what is not, and don't rely upon centuries-old church propaganda, because many of the people who put forth the views that are common about pagans, they were using the cloak of their religion as an excuse to trample on their religious and or political opponents. We are currently in a moment of history in which we can choose as individuals to be and to do better, and we can do something other than just repeat the mistakes of prior generations. We have it within our power to recycle, to be on an honest footing with each other, and to move forward. So I hope you'll come along for that. On the next episode, I will cover the characteristics of a pagan worldview, and I hope you do come back to like the video. Please let me know, especially in the comment section. Please, enjoyed what I said, didn't enjoy it, agree, disagree, whatever the situation is. Let me know. Let me know the why. Then subscribe to the channel if you would care to. And of course, please share this video and future episodes with anyone who you think is open for this discussion or would benefit from it. My email is in the description box if you would like to reach out for more one-on-one conversation. And don't be a stranger. Be happy to talk to you there. But that has covered our first episode, and bye for now.